Okay, hi everybody. Welcome. My name is Allison Locker. I'm the director of the Visual Arts Gallery here at UIS. And I'm joined by our gallery manager, Bella Zabo, and also Frances Lee, who is now exhibiting at UIS. Her exhibition, Attacks on a Bag and Other Landscapes, is now open through Thursday, February 16th. And I also want to note that this exhibition is presented in partnership with Acre, a nonprofit artist-run organization based in Chicago. So I'd like to introduce Frances. A keen observer of the visual world and social dynamics, Frances Lee uses the methods of painting, sculpture, and writing to create diagrammatic images that investigate the material and symbolic relationships between the depicted forms of everyday encounters. Originally from Oakland, California, Lee lives and works in Chicago. She received a bachelor's degree from Oberlin College and a master's degree in fine arts from the University of Chicago. Lee is currently a lecturer at the University of Chicago, teaching for the Department of Visual Arts at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. In 2018, her work was selected for Ground Floor, a biennial exhibition of emerging Chicago artists at the Hyde Park Art Center. She has also participated in several residencies and programs, including the Center Program at HPAC, Acre, and the Vermont Studio Center. So welcome, Frances.
Thank you, Allison. I really want to thank you and the team at the gallery, Allison and Bella, for supporting this work. And again, thank you to the Acre Residency and Exhibitions team who connected me with this opportunity and have been supporting and promoting the exhibition. Tonight, I'm going to do a deep dive of the work in the show in the hopes that it introduces you to the themes and ways of working that run consistently through my practice. This is also a way for me to better understand the exhibition selfishly and I've put together over the last month and get direct thoughts and questions on this work. Strong themes that currently occupy me in the work and that I will discuss this evening are public space as architecture and physical spaces, but also as shared social discourse. In many of the works, I investigate figure-ground relationships in response to architecture and social setting. I will also talk about color and how I study color in the studio. In my work, I focus on investigations of color to build compositional space and consider social, cultural, and phenomenological meaning, or the direct experience of color. I will also speak to my recent interest in camouflage as an art and science concept. I've been studying the scientific classifications of camouflage in animals to see how in practice these concepts are very different than Harry's invisibility cloak, which kind of makes the assumption that to camouflage yourself is to be the same as the background. Instead, in this example that I'm showing of penguins, many ways that animals are able to change their recognition in plain sight is through disrupting the perception of their edges or their silhouette so that predators have a harder time translating or recognizing what they're seeing. In both painting and sculpture, I'm using these formal and conceptual camouflage ideas to change the recognition of an object, not by making it the same as the background, but by similarly disrupting edges, silhouette, and the recognition in plain sight. I'm interested in how both revealing and concealing edges and objects can be a form of communication that shows a common sense of space from a new perspective. I will also speak to this concept of diagrammatic images that I'm interested in, and how I think about methods of abstraction as a tool to produce symbolic thought for myself and the viewer. I wanted to start with discussing this work, which many of you may have seen as it's the promotional image for the show, as well as one of the first things that you see when you enter the gallery. This piece is kind of an origin piece for many of the works that are in the show. I became interested in a stack of paper bags that I had in my studio, kind of accumulated as I take things back and forth from different spaces, and admired the well-designed utilitarian object. I'm also interested in how shopping bags are literary symbols of climate change. Kind of similar to the title for the exhibition, the tax on shopping bags is popular in urban environments as a method to decrease one-use plastics or paper. That's a symbol of changing behavior, puts an emphasis on the morality of personal choices of consumption as the symbol of climate change. At the same time, I was making paintings of a new high-rise building on the Chicago skyline, and I wanted to collage these studies of the building with the structural and cultural narrative of the paper bag. At the time, I was staying in this room at the Marine Biology Laboratory in Woodsville, which Allison mentioned, which is a place that I traveled to for the past couple of years, and will be there in about a month, to teach an art class to science students. And as part of this program, I co-teach a lesson on camouflage with a marine scientist who works there, Roger Hanlon. And so at the time, we were kind of discussing these concepts with each other and coming up with this activity for students to do. And I started experimenting with how I could change the recognition and silhouette of the bag similarly to those penguins that I showed earlier. So over the last year, I've continued to arrange and build from scratch paper bags to continue to explore this question of how the climate crisis is imaged, and explore relationships between individualized acts and quantity or accumulation. These three sculptures work as a triptych in the exhibition. I've not really kind of officially given this sequence a title. I think in the gallery guide, it's just untitled, but I've been recently thinking about maybe rock, paper, scissors, or as a relationship, or the nicknames I use as I make lists of work in my sketchbook or notes, which are House of Cards, Collapse, and Negative Space. This work investigates the question, how do we understand numerical quantities through a formal investigation of weight, volume, surface area, structure, and sequence? I'm interested in the relationship between the physicality of the numbers and our perception of them in space. In this sculpture, there are 36 handmade bags. That number here is both volume and surface area. And I've created a system where each piece of paper that separates each row is the same dimensions as the piece of paper that's folded up to create the bag. So it's kind of a self-contained system. And in my experimentations in the studio, this height of 4 rows is kind of the limit of this 3x3 row grid that can hold both an object and itself up. So there's a rock placed kind of directly on top of this structure in the exhibition. In collapse, the bags are compressed to a new volume. Same bags, but a new arrangement. And in the final piece, emphasis is shifted from the outline of the grid in the house of cards to the interior volume of the bag. In this work, I use color to shift the appearance of the object. You no longer see the edges or the exterior of the bag, but instead see the negative space of the interior of the bag, which shifts the image of the number 9. 9 is no longer the basic unit of a floor of the grid, it's now this deep interior space of the bags. When communicating about numbers, we need to understand context, sites, and setting for us to really understand the impact or consequence of that quantity. This gesture of painting some of the bags blue changes the craft paper for me from being a neutral to a recognizable color through their comparison. The blue on the bottom row of this sculpture also disappears this row, which then I'm interested in how that changes the categorization of how we see the grid. And I kind of want to emphasize here that the color does not need to be the same as the floor, the same as the background, but needs instead to have a relationship with the floor that activates our sense of that object in space. This work is made from 1,300 machine-made bags. And here I was really interested in seeing how many bags and in what order were needed to create the image of a line. Similar to the works in the last piece, this work takes a certain amount of pressure to hold the objects in place. And here again, we have kind of an image of the limit of that kind of compression. It was important to me to paint the first one in the line to draw the viewer's attention to that single plane and structure behind the painting. I was also interested in presenting a different point of view in subverting the horizontal line by shifting our perspective to the front or back of that kind of conceptual landscape line. Following on these same intentions of investigating weight and gravity acting on the bags as they respond to different conditions, in my studio, I had created this moment of balance, symmetry, through balancing this kind of interrupted column of bags on the cement block, where the bag has gravity acting on it, and so it kind of wraps on either side of the block, but at a certain point as they're stacked, because of the volume that's created when you fold the bag up, and the bottom of the bag is kind of twice as big as the top of the bag because it's twice as much material, that that counteracts that initial image and eventually hits a plateau. So I was really interested in how I could disrupt our perception of that image of balance, not by changing the dynamic, but by shifting an edge through a plane of color to now make this symmetrical composition imbalanced. Weight is acting the same, but now our vision of it has changed. Oftentimes when you're working with sculpture or installation, you can make sketches in your studio, but due to space constraints, you will not be able to fully understand the work until it's really in its installation or context. And I was speaking a little bit about this to the students at the opening last week, and how in this process kind of fun accidents or new images can emerge, which in this piece I've become really interested in how this green plane really became almost an image of water to me. Murky water, which added to kind of this ledge and the tension of the image. Another investigation I have here, kind of also a balance, is created through a mirroring, but kind of through the momentum of this image, there's also potential collapse and or collide. And here again, we have this I have a 2-to-1 ratio where the bottom of the bag has twice as much material when it is folded up as the front of the bag. And so the rate of change as you stack them kind of has this 2-to-1 ratio, which creates this this kind of mirroring image. I also wanted to, in putting this presentation together, include a couple of other works or sketches I have been making or working on in this body of work, but that did not make it into the exhibition, but are still kind of investigations of these same ideas. Again, we have this image of the rate of change from that 2-to-1 ratio and the transition from horizontal to vertical, which are two limits of space. Kind of the movement, momentum, and pattern that's created from this 2-to-1 ratio. I'm also interested in the bag's behavior during compression and release. In the new internal images that can be made from these arrangements. Here, I see an image of speed, almost that could reference an object moving through space, pedestrian or car moving through space. Another set of investigations I made were seeing how to hold an image of water on the structure of the bag. I think of this sculpture as the image of the weight of water, testing the limits of the paper and the folded structure to be able to hold up this color or image as after it when the paint is applied, but also after it dries. Another install shot of the exhibition. The three paintings on cardboard in the show, which are kind of on this left wall, come from a body of work that I made last year. Similarly, I became interested in how the liquid in painting can distort and change the surface of the paper that it's painted on. And so I started working with cardboard, mostly because it was around, I had a lot of it in my studio. It's inexpensive. I can move through ideas quickly. And I was also interested in that it had its own structure and design and could be kind of moved around and stored. But I began making these works on oil paintings on cardboard that then, as I was working on them, would warp and bend. And so, as this was happening, I chose not to fight it, but keep that as a visual element in the painting. Because why am I interested in this? Because the application of materials changes the material. And ultimately, these are all materials. This is a constructed image and a constructed object. Some of the works from this, some of the paintings from this body of work are framed. So I needed to make frames that have the same curvature of the board or can hold the shape in place in view. And I kind of designed the system with steel wire to use the corrugation of the cardboard to hold the painting in place. This body of work is titled When She Walks the Route After Waiting for the Bus, and is a group of images inspired and prompted by a relentless sign that was posted in my neighborhood during the pandemic that declared outrage at a local woman state's attorney. So on my block, these signs would kind of go up and people would take them down, and within a few days they would go back up again. They would be posted on trees, bus stops, telephone poles, kind of in sidewalk space where you walk. And the sign was or is like an 8.5 by 11 white piece of paper with the block letters shouting, "Kim Fox is a kid abusing crook." And the sign is formally made kind of visually larger with layered newspapers, usually Chicago Tribune or New York Times. I did not go to the website that was promoted on these signs, but it has the same narrative and conventions of the QAnon conspiracy theory. And so, similar to my earlier description of the sculptures, of kind of asking this initial question of how the climate crisis is imaged, I started with this question of how is government imaged? I began experimenting with the forms on the street and expanding the space around the sign. What is the context? What is the sign in relationship to what other images of space and public space and governmental space are in the image? I found that that the language of abstraction could be a helpful tool to answer this initial question. And specific colors became characters in this story about the alleged crooked woman, in quotations, where the orange traffic law violation, the phlegm yellow newspaper frames, the sidewalk and road with its accompanying shapes of planted green polygons, red patterned crosswalks, and the brown verticals waiting by the local bus stop. The project localizes an investigation of how knowledge is compounded from images and their materials. The group of works from this series is an observation of paranoia in our contemporary society and how those observations can narrate a story about gender, politics, and our social and built environments. In this work, I'm also interested in the parallel stories of women in public space, both as active public figures who are demonized, but also in the micro experience of what it's like to have someone put their body in front of you while you are walking through space. I'm also interested in how paintings are hung. Why? Because the architecture, setting, and context can become a part of the structure of the image. On the back wall of the exhibition is a painting project I call The Toss. Inspired by a few recent moments where I've witnessed trash thrown out of the window of a car, I'm really interested in these kinds of images where I'm able to suspend the moral tension of a gesture. Again, here, abstraction is an attempt or aspiration towards negating, countering, or opening up our recognition or understanding of prescribed visual elements. In these small works, I'm using acrylic paint on paper, and I'm painting with a palette knife to kind of clarify edges and make shapes in the images. And again, I'm exploring camouflage through color and shape, the hue and lightness or darkness of value. And I'm really interested in having the gesture or trash out the window define the figure-ground relationship in the image. In this work, I repeat the subject from different points of view, shifting the way the car, the window, the road, the trash, and the edges of space are painted to keep this figure-ground relationship unsettled. In these works, imbalance or the sense of vertigo is within the structure of the composition and shape. We're kind of living in image heavy or even image dominant culture. And I'm interested in creating more images, creating images that suspend a moment in time, not to archive it and categorize it, but to investigate feeling and energy. I think color plays a large role in creating space in these images or in these scenes. The color is relational and it extends the experience and interpretation of the image. I've been thinking a lot about how color is an indexical image. What I mean by that, like smoke is an image of fire. how it can visually separate itself from an object or surface to communicate to us humans, both social meaning and perceived space. I have a few more images from this series, and so I'm just going to kind of silently toggle through them for a few seconds each. Maybe the English language is a difficult tool for me to use to explain all these things that I'm noticing about color. I was recently reading about how in ancient Greek language, there is no blue, there's no word for blue, but many words that describe the experience of blue, describing light, hue saturation, material, and social context. And so I want to see similarly what can be learned without a method of categorization about how color works through an exploration and a description of how color activates a point of view. The painting in the exhibition titled Columbus is another important touchstone work for me in the exhibition. The inspiration for making the image came from the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue in Chicago's Grant Park, and this recent national and global practice of reconsidering monuments. I was interested in taking on the prompt of the point of view from above, the point of view of the statue, but I didn't want to prescribe that that kind of specificity, as in many of the works I tried to put the viewer in the place of trying to understand where the point of view is with their own associations, like a bird or a drone. But what I wanted to, why I was interested in this point of view was that I wanted to focus on this perspective and the feeling of falling, and falling specifically into the architecture of mediated public space. I've been working on this specific composition for a few years with multiple drafts of the image. I can never really seem to get it right. So I'm going to show you just a few earlier studies. What I'm trying to achieve is the shift of perspective from a straight down view to a closer slant view, to again achieve that feeling of the sense of vertigo or falling in space. In the exhibition, it was important to hang the painting next to the window, which for those of you who have been to the gallery or were able to see the show during the daytime, know that the kind of effect of this window and the gallery kind of feels like it's a cantilever or in space over on a kind of a second story and a kind of a meeting park space below. So it's not that I wanted the painting to be near the window, but I really wanted it to be pushed up against it and kind of in this extreme view of closeness. So again, I'm always asking how architecture can inform the structure of a composition. The last work or project I'm going to talk about is the long painting in the exhibition, which I have titled Blue. The work is an acrylic painting on canvas and is 9 inches by 120 inches with this extreme elongated view. This work also comes from a project that I have been working on for a while, visiting and studying the architecture of Planned Parenthood buildings. I was interested in how these Planned Parenthood clinics are a site of political conflict, and again, a literary symbol similar to the shopping bags of women in public or political life. The medical clinics in space are designed to be inconspicuous, innocuous, but are also discreet and withholding. I'm asking myself, are these buildings camouflaged into their environments? And if so, how? I made some earlier paintings of the same building, which focused on the flatness and the experience of flatness and conflict on the facade. This is an oil painting on cardboard. But what was missing from this earlier painting were the dynamics that I am really interested in of the current state of healthcare and the role of private clinics, philanthropic money, gender, and socioeconomic class dynamics. So I've been working on some new works like the painting in the show to really interrogate that. I think of blue as one of the subjects of the work from the branded blue text of the organization, and also the dynamics of how the hue builds and complicates space in this painting. I gave myself the challenge of trying to make a blue painting that looked hot. It looked like it was a hot day, it looked warm. And the painting really focuses on a name or the title of this specific Planned Parenthood, which is named the Elizabeth Cone Morris Center. In focusing on text as an image, I was also interested in how the name of the donor announces itself and is in tension with the confidentiality of the other participants within the space. In making the work, I found that photos that I would take on the street were pretty unsatisfying to work from. And so I ended up actually building a whole replica of the sign in my studio that I hung high on the wall and painted observationally beneath to achieve this kind of this view that is changing over time across the 120 inches to really kind of achieve that view of the pedestrian walking beneath the sign, beneath the name, and the kind of way that that experience visualizes and frames the text. Again, here, I've also played with the height it is hung at to shift or further emphasize the extreme of the perspective. It's hung, it's a little bit hard to see in this photograph, but it's hung a little bit lower than normal height. And so it sits kind of at my chin as I walk by this painting. So I'm now happy to open up the conversation for thoughts or questions from the group. Thank you.
Hi, Francis. Thank you. Thank you for that talk. I don't know if this is a question yet, but I think I have a thought about the way that you use blue across the different projects. I noticed like blue in the paper bag project had this feeling of either camouflage or like negative blending in with or blurring the lines or water. And then in this latest painting that you were just talking about, it's like another character perhaps. So kind of if you were speaking ancient Greek or something, like, do you have kind of your own feeling about what those different blues mean?
I don't know if I can fully answer that, mostly just to say that, yes, I'm studying it. And I think that that was one of the interests and that kind of challenge that I set up for myself to think about how I could make blue look warm, look hot. So, you know, I think I am really thinking a lot about how it behaves on a surface. And what it's like when it's opaque versus transparent, and what kinds of things are making up the pigment or the material of the blue. Yeah, I don't have a total conclusion about it yet, but yeah, I think I'm trying to create a kind of visual vocabulary similar to this idea about describing the behavior of the color or the social context for it.
Yeah, I found myself trying to ascribe, like trying to notice how I was labeling each color, what each color made me think of. I was curious.
Hey, Francis.
Hi.
Congrats. The show looks like the images look incredible. I think it's like one of my favorite. I was telling Aaron, it's one of my favorite looking exhibitions I've seen in that space. So it looks really good. I guess my question is, and you spoke to this a little bit. I think there's sort of two sides to the work. There's like the super formally focused aspects of like color, painting, like you talked about the figure and ground relationships, a lot of those things that are, about the language of just formal abstraction and that sort of thing. And then there are some of those like cultural, social, political things, whether it's climate change or like the Kim Fox thing or any of that. And you spoke to how abstraction sort of responds, or how you use abstraction to respond to some of those things. But I guess my question is like, can you speak more to how you see abstraction in terms of its ability or inability to speak to those things, I guess, to different, whether it's specifically to the issues that you're focused on and interested in, or just in general as a whole?
Yeah, I think that the kind of one thing I'm really interested in the work, like you said, is like composition and form and shape. And I think that those are tools for this kind of phrase I use, like diagrammatic images, to create relationships between objects kind of in a painting. For example, in the Columbus painting, I have this list of things that are kind of, nouns that I want to be in the scene. Like I want the red curb, and I want the evidence of some of like the driver, and also the fence and the edge of the monument. But I think that it's really important to then play or kind of like stretch those relationships to build different kind of hierarchies in space in these images that can kind of communicate what it's like to be kind of perceiving space, right? What space feels like. So I find that building those kinds of relationships, simplifying and then building back up complicating the image through those relationships is really fruitful for my own thinking. As we're as I'm thinking about the kind of moral tensions of that scene. I think that the Blue Planned Parenthood painting is another example of that, where the experience of walking on the street next to that building and looking up at that sign, you're not really reading. The image, the text is an image that then kind of bleeds into space and gets defined by its under edge. And so I think most of the time how we are perceiving space is through those kinds of abstractions, and then our brain kind of puts it back into the categories that we're used to.
Hi, Francis.
Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing. It was great. And great that it
I'm so
pulled
glad
us across into remote location there. Can you bring amazing things I heard throughout? Can you talk a bit about size of the objects and images themselves?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking mostly in the context of like what size should perception be? I mean, I'm all in that. I really like how you said words. That each painting is kind of, there are a couple colors, there are a couple words, because they're kind of objects, and they are all in this like almost paranoid, like thrown at you, like perceive them now but not yet moment. And I enjoy all of these like schizophrenic abstraction pushed perspectives That's how I see the images a bit. And so I wonder then about the size of the thing itself on the wall and how you make those choices, and are you tending toward the bigger or the smaller? And
Yeah, I think in this show, the work is maybe more intimate, and is really kind of on maybe the scale of your face, mostly, and or kind of the scale of the body. And I don't know if down the line the works may, with kind of more time and resources and materials, if the works could get bigger, but I think that has been consistent in my practice over time, that things are kind of often worked on on an intimate scale, but to be talking about kind of public discourse and public space, so that I guess I'm trying to keep present an emphasis that this is a narrative told kind of from a specific point of view, right? By keeping kind of mark making and authorship really present in the work. And I think that probably this observation you're asking or making about scale influences that. Like the toss paintings, they're not exactly like diaristic, but kind of, they're kind of daily observations or manipulations where I continue to play with that composition, but in its repetition kind of has this kind of daily practice to it, but in this intimate scale.
Okay, are there any other questions for Frances?
Thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed being able to share these ideas and hear some of your questions.
Frances, thank you so much. It's a great show. And I want to thank everyone that joined us tonight. Thank you so much. And if you can, come to see the show at the UIS Visual Arts Gallery.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.